Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melisa Liberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Today, we're talking about why it's so important to become the rainmaker in your consulting business so that you can hit your revenue goals without constantly selling. That might seem like a contradiction, becoming the rainmaker without constantly selling, but you can do this. And it's going to make it so much easier for you to generate leads, sell amazing work that you want to be doing with high quality clients for the type of pricing you want to hit. So that's what we're talking about today on episode 281 of the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. This is Melisa Liberman, and specifically today, it's all about becoming the rainmaker in your consulting business without constantly selling. This episode was inspired by a conversation I had earlier today with an independent consultant. He has gone through the lead gen sprint, and we're talking about what was coming next for him and his business. And he said this to me. It was so inspiring. He said, my goal by the end of this year and going into next year is to become the rainmaker in this business. So think of myself as the rainmaker, to have the results of the rainmaker. And it really got me thinking about the way we think about ourselves in our businesses. And oftentimes we think about ourselves as the consultant, the expert, the person who works with clients. But then when it comes to the side of running our business, we might think of ourselves as a business owner. That's not that inspiring, really, is it? We might think of ourselves as someone who has to do a lot of things we don't really want to do when it comes to running our business. Like, kind of a taskmaster and a recipient of these tasks that we're giving ourselves. But it's really rare to think of ourselves in a way that's inspiring. And when he said to me today that his goal is to become the rainmaker in his business, it really got me to thinking about, what does it take? How can we be thinking of ourselves in a way that feels inspiring to make it so much easier to land the type of business we want to be landing versus thinking of ourselves as, drudgery, like doing the stuff we have to do that then enables us to do the stuff we love to do. Instead, thinking about it in two really inspiring ways. That we're a rainmaker bringing in high quality clients that are paying us what matches up to our revenue goals. And we get to do the execution and the work that we love in working with our clients. It can be both. And so that's what I want to talk with you about today. So after I was talking to this consultant and he started telling me about his goal of becoming the rainmaker, it really got me to thinking about past rainmakers that I've worked with in corporate, that I've worked with as a coach to independent consultants, in my own consulting practice with clients. And that's what I want to share with you today. What is this formula to becoming a rainmaker in your consulting business? What does it look like? It doesn't require you to be an extrovert. It doesn't require you to just naturally have these skills. And it's a lot easier than it might imagine. And it can create that inspiration. It can create that inspiration for you to go after something that feels like, I'm the rainmaker now. I can bring in clients whenever I want to. I can bring in high quality clients whenever I want to. I can bring in clients that will pay what I want to charge whenever I want to. That's the type of inspiration that I want to give you today. And it's not just inspiration, though. Let me be clear about that. This is a way of thinking that's incredibly important as you go into the running of your business, the steps to run your business, the overlap between delivery and selling, all of the aspects within your business. When you're approaching them thinking as the rainmaker, it's going to shift the types of results that you're getting. And I'll dive into that in a lot more detail here in this episode. Okay, now that you know the inspiration and a little backstory behind that, let's talk about the agenda and then we'll get going. So, first, I'll share with you today the companion resource for this episode. Then we'll talk about specifically what's a rainmaker. Let's be very clear. That term might resonate with you, or you might not exactly know what it means specifically. Generally, of course, you do, but specifically. And then we're going to talk about how to become one as an independent consultant. And I'm going to give you three very specific examples of rainmakers who I personally work with, who I know who are truly rainmakers in their businesses, even if they might not use that label for themselves, so that you can use that as real life, practical, implementable examples for yourself and your own business. And then we'll wrap it up with the exact steps to put this episode into action. This is super important. Stay to the very end because I share with you some questions that you want to be going through as you think about designing this rainmaker mindset for yourself. Okay, the companion resource. I want to invite you to my next training. So, the training is all about how to always have your next consulting client lined up without the constant pressure. I'm so excited about this. I would love to invite you to attend. It's on August 11th if you're listening to this in the real time, or there may be some encore presentations as well if you're listening to this after August 11th, 2026. But go to icworkshop.info. That's IC for Independent Consultant Workshop.info. All the information will be there. You can register there. It's a free training, and I'm excited to talk with you about how to always have your next consulting client lined up. So go register for that. I will see you there. And now let's talk about what is a rainmaker. So I thought it'd be interesting. In fact, I went back and did some asking of AI, where did this come from? What is the origination of rainmaker? So I think that's important, right? Sometimes we just start using terms in life and we don't really even know where they come from. As I went back, I thought it was really interesting. Here's the specific answer. A rainmaker was originally someone believed to be capable of bringing rain during a drought. Having grown up on a cattle ranch, having grown up, my great, I think, grandparents homesteaded where my parents live right now, where I grew up. The weather is a really important part of that lifestyle, right? If you don't have rain, which is a problem right now in Colorado, it's a really hard existence. So a rainmaker was originally someone believed to be capable of bringing rain during a drought. But then it turned into also a term used in business. In business, the term came to describe someone who can create opportunities and revenue when everyone else is waiting for conditions to improve. I want to say that to you again. I think it's so important. And you see the corollary, right, between the drought. In business, the term came to describe someone who can create opportunities and revenue when everyone else is waiting for conditions to improve. So if you think about this idea of a rainmaker, you might think about movies like The Wolf of Wall Street or, people who have unnatural talents or talents that are not common, we'll put it that way. But to be a successful rainmaker as an independent consultant, you don't need to have some magical powers. You don't need to be born with certain attributes or characteristics that the rest of us don't have. You are someone, when you're a rainmaker as an independent consultant, you become the kind of person who can create opportunities. Now, of course, for some people, this comes more naturally than for others. But I want to say to you today, this is so important that you can become the kind of person who creates opportunities. This is not limited to the people where it comes more naturally to them. All right? That's why this is important. You want to be that rainmaker for your business, someone who can create opportunities and revenue when everyone else is waiting for conditions to improve. Imagine the freedom that you get from this. Part of the reason why you created this business is to have that freedom and autonomy. And it comes from being the rainmaker. Now, if this feels like a huge stretch for you, I want to encourage you to think about this as a set of steps, you getting closer and closer to becoming that rainmaker for yourself. Because it's possible, instead of thinking like, that's just out of reach, that feels impossible, that doesn't feel like something I could do with my personality, and turning off this episode. Don't do that. Keep going with the episode, even if it feels out of reach to you, because I'm going to share with you more here about how to become a rainmaker, even if you're an introvert or this feels out of reach. Okay, so now that we talked about the origination of Rainmaker, let's talk about it specifically for a consultant. What's a consultant rainmaker? A rainmaker is a consultant who consistently creates and attracts valuable opportunities. They're known for something. People trust their perspective. Clients and colleagues think of them when an important problem arises. They're invited into conversations rather than always pursuing them. Think about that with respect to where you're at right now. You might not think of yourself as a rainmaker yet, but you've got some of these pieces in place. Even if you don't give yourself credit for all of them, you've got some of these pieces in place. Let's build upon them. I'll say them again. We'll also put them in the show notes so you can have all of this written out in writing for you. Use it as a checklist for yourself. A rainmaker is a consultant who consistently creates and attracts valuable opportunities. They're known for something. If you're someone who's resisting, niching down, or specializing, rethink that. You're not leaving opportunity on the table when you become more specific. It's the opposite. When you're not specific, you're not known for something. No one knows why they would engage you or thinks of you when they have a certain problem that needs to be solved, or when they hear someone who's explaining a problem that you could potentially solve. They don't connect the dots. You can't expect them to. It's your job to be known for something. People trust their perspective. It's the thought leadership, it's the speaking, it's the building of frameworks and methodologies and cross-client expertise where you can bring to the table examples for one client to show them what's working in the industry and what's not working in the industry and become a trusted advisor for them. That your clients and colleagues think of you when an important problem arises that you solve. And you're invited into conversations rather than always feeling like you're pursuing them. This is a consultant rainmaker. This is available to you. And I'll tell you how here in a second. But first, I want to say what this isn't. A rainmaker is not, and I've touched on a lot of this already, but it's really important. A rainmaker isn't someone with those natural talents. Of course, they can be, but it's not required. It's not someone who's extroverted. Of course, a rainmaker can be extroverted, but it's not required. Oftentimes, the introverted people, the ones who are more quiet, not always trying to commandeer the conversation, are the ones that people trust because they can see you listening. They can see you thinking about what's being said and that you're offering something valuable, just not speaking to speak. A rainmaker is not salesy. A rainmaker is not selling 24/7. These are not the things, even though so often we think a rainmaker requires these things, right? We don't want to be a rainmaker because, well, number one, you might not even have thought of it that way before, right? But then you start thinking, do I want to be a rainmaker? And it starts feeling hard. It starts feeling exhausting. It starts feeling unsustainable. But it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way because you don't have to be these things, extroverted, salesy, always selling, in order to be a rainmaker. It can be sustainable because it's a way of thinking of yourself. We'll talk more about how to become the rainmaker here in a minute. But simply put, a rainmaker isn't someone who sells all the time. There's someone who the market remembers, who your ideal client remembers and trusts and seeks out and wants to invite them into the conversation. That's what a rainmaker is. It doesn't have to be exhausting or tiring or hard or impossible because you're missing some kind of personality trait or characteristic. This is something you can develop. And ultimately, the benefits of being a rainmaker are likely obvious here, but I want to say them anyway because sometimes it's hard to get out of our own head. When you think of yourself as a rainmaker, when you operate as a rainmaker, you have more control over the opportunities that you're pursuing. You're able to be more selective. You can have better fit clients and work, right? Rather than feeling like you have to take whatever comes across your desk or settle with that red flag client you knew better, but you did it anyway. You're less dependent on luck and timing. You're more confident during uncertain pipeline time frames. When the news is on or you read what's going on in the world, it doesn't shake you because you know that you can land work and that ideal clients want to work with you. It gives you greater pricing power and negotiation ability. It compounds your reputation, makes it every compound then adds to the compound, right? It's a compounding effect because you're known for something. And the more people seek you out, then the more people seek you out. Those ideal clients with engagements that you want to be doing. And you have more freedom to shape the consulting business you want, to control your time, to control your pricing, to turn away red flag clients. Those are the benefits of being a rainmaker. So now the $1,000,000 question, right? How do you become this rainmaker? Hopefully I've convinced you that this is something worth thinking about. This is something worth giving yourself the permission to even pursue the concept that you could become a rainmaker. You might be someone right now who is behind on their revenue goals or won't even set a revenue goal because it feels so out of reach to land your first client. But the answer isn't waiting until you have a pile of projects and a pile of successes before you give yourself permission to think about yourself as a rainmaker or to see yourself as a rainmaker. Because then you just keep delaying and making it harder for yourself, making it harder for yourself to land that next client, making it harder for yourself to have a high quality pipeline in parallel with working with your clients. When you think of yourself as just a business owner or someone who does business development because they have to, those are the ways of thinking that create friction and drag. For you, you're in your own way. And believe me, I know this because I've done it myself a million times, especially when I was in corporate and especially when I first started my business. There is zero chance I would have ever thought of myself as a rainmaker or that I could ever become a rainmaker. I thought that was for the, less than 1%, the people who are born with this personality, who are born natural salespeople, who are quite frankly willing to compromise their values to land clients. But a rainmaker isn't all of those things. It doesn't have to be all of those things. But when you think of yourself and give yourself permission to say, you know what, I am a rainmaker. I am someone who is an expert in my field, in my industry, in my type of work of consulting that I do. And I have the ability to attract ideal clients. That's the way that you start becoming a rainmaker. Let me say it another way. You become a rainmaker not because you've hit some arbitrary threshold or arbitrary bar of number of projects you've landed, type of projects you've landed, how much revenue you've generated. It's not about any of that because that's all made up, right? It's all arbitrary. Becoming a rainmaker starts with how you see yourself. Not as someone who's waiting to be chosen or not as someone who's waiting for the ideal client to come along or waiting to land a larger contract than you've landed so far or more contracts than you've landed so far. It's you thinking of yourself as someone who has the expertise, who has the perspective, who has value worth bringing to your industry. Now, you might say to me, well, I don't have a clear specialization. I don't have a clear ideal client that I'm targeting. I don't know what I want to be known for. And I will say to you, that's a problem. You need to know that. And it's not as hard as you think. We overcomplicate it. Pick something. You've got expertise. You've had experience in the past, whether it's in corporate or as a consultant or both. What did you enjoy doing? Who do you enjoy working with? What types of companies? What size of companies? What examples do you have from your past Again, it doesn't matter if you were consulting or you were in industry or you were a leader or an individual contributor. None of that matters. What does matter is that you've got expertise, you've got experience doing certain types of work. Figure out what you enjoy and choose that as your specialization. Choose that as to what you want to become a rainmaker for. And know that you can always change it later if you don't like it. But you're never going to get anywhere if you are constantly trying to overcomplicate this or find the perfect thing before you decide, you know what, I'm going to become a rainmaker for this type of work. I'm going to become a rainmaker for strategy type of work, for mid-size fintech firms, whatever it is, right? You pick. But start it with, I am going to become a rainmaker who attracts opportunities from my ideal clients. And my ideal clients are fill in the blank, and they are facing fill in the blank type of problems, and they want to create fill in the blank type of outcomes. That's how you become a rainmaker. You're not anointed. There's not a place you could go that someone says, a committee says, you're a rainmaker now. You literally get to decide. And you deciding, I'm a rainmaker for this thing, this lane, this specialization, this niche, you deciding that you're a rainmaker for that is actually going to speed up the results that you're creating. Again, you don't wait for the results to then give yourself the title, because the bar always will be moving. That line will constantly be moving. I see it over and over and over again where our mind plays tricks on us. That whatever doesn't count, or it's not good enough yet, or it's not enough. So just decide, I'm a rainmaker for this specialization, for this type of consulting, for what I want to be known for, and then go for it. Little by little, every single day, reminding yourself you're that rainmaker. Looking for evidence of how you're that rainmaker, not evidence of how you're not. That's not useful. We can always find evidence for both sides of the argument. Why are we constantly looking for evidence of how we're wrong, or how we're not qualified enough, or how we're not there yet? It's not helpful. Go look for evidence of how you already are a rainmaker and how you can build upon that. It's you working on who before how. Because when you see yourself as a rainmaker, you're braver, you're more curious, you're more discerning, you're more creative, you're more committed to mastery. I think about all the time, I love to be a student of my profession. I love to be a student of what makes independent consultants successful. Constantly obsessed with this. That's what a rainmaker does. A rainmaker is visible. A rainmaker is raising their hand saying, listen, this is a challenge in the industry. Here are some ways to solve that. A rainmaker is more willing to start meaningful conversations with decision makers. So you see, when you think of yourself as a rainmaker, and you might have to start off with, it's possible I'm a rainmaker, right? Might feel so out of reach to you that it could backfire because it's such a reach. Give yourself some steps to get there. It's possible I can become a rainmaker. Let me think about how that is. How am I already a rainmaker? How am I on my way to being a rainmaker? So that you get yourself in that headspace, so that you see yourself that way, so that then you create the bravery and the curiosity and the discernment and the visibility and the mastery and the valuable conversations and the creativity of how you get on your decision makers' calendars, because you're a rainmaker. So let's wrap up this episode with 3 examples, and then I'll share with you how to put this episode into action for yourself and your own business, although I've already been doing that, obviously, as we went. But I summarize it for you. Okay, let me give you the first example. A consultant, we'll call her Elizabeth. She was someone who was incredibly successful in corporate. In fact, responsible for generating business. A lot of us in corporate were not responsible for marketing or sales or landing clients. In her case, she had experience in corporate driving business, driving revenue. But when she went independent, it was as if all of that just dissipated. And that experience, we talk about this on the podcast often, right? Where she just had amnesia, like, doesn't remember exactly how she did that. It felt like the company that she was working with had so many resources, had so many other people, had so many tools, had so much training, had so much support, and her title, of course, all of that went away. And so she felt like she wasn't able to be a rainmaker anymore. It didn't even cross her mind. And she wouldn't use this word maybe even today. But when I look at and was thinking about who are some of the top rainmakers as independent consultants, her name came to my mind right away. I think of her as a rainmaker. And the reason why is because she was able to rebuild her identity from thinking that she was only successful or could only be successful because of that whole corporate ecosystem, and instead started thinking of herself as a rainmaker, as an independent consultant, as someone who could land clients whenever she wanted to, as someone who could land high quality clients in the type of work she wanted to be doing. And I know this because I see her turning work away. I see her turning work away even when she's not fully utilized, even when she's behind a bit on her revenue goals. She turns the work away because she's confident in herself as a rainmaker that she'll be able to go fill in whatever work she wants to fill in. Now, does it happen exactly on her time frame? No. But I will tell you, the more of the type of work that she wants to land, when she turns away work she doesn't want, as soon as she turns away a project, a couple of weeks later, that ideal client comes along. And she would be fully utilized and have to turn them away if she hadn't turned down that red flag client. That's a rainmaker. But it started from her rebuilding her identity from what she had in corporate and all the confidence that she had created there, and realizing that it wasn't about the whole ecosystem or her title. It was about the knowledge and the skill set and the expertise. And that's what helped her to what I'll call transfer the rainmaker persona from corporate over to her consulting business. Now, you might be someone who is very confident. I share this example with you, not because you had sales experience in corporate. That's more rare for us as independent consultants, but likely you had a lot of confidence when you were in corporate. And you can transfer that confidence over. It's not about what you were doing or how you were doing it that created that confidence. It's the way you saw yourself. And so that can be transferable if you choose to do so. Let's talk about the second example. So I wanted to give you two more examples of consultants who don't have any sales experience whatsoever. They didn't have a track record coming into their independent consulting business when it relates to selling work. And the first one is Rachel. So when I think about Rachel, I see her as a rainmaker because she attracts work and speaking opportunities globally. She's built her reputation in a way that ideal clients think of her and approach her when they know that they need her expertise, because they know what her expertise is. They know what type of work she does. They know and think of her because she stays so visible when they need that type of work. That's what Rachel has done to build up that reputation. And it doesn't take a long time, but it does take intentionality to become that rainmaker, someone who, whenever a big project comes along, that a lot of us would just dismiss because we would assume that the named companies would get access to that and they wouldn't even think of us as independent consultants. That's not true. She gets those opportunities. They bypass those well-named brands and come to her because of the reputation that she's built. She's a rainmaker because of the results that she's created in the industry and her willingness to be visible, to create relationships in the industry, to create thought leadership that she shares with the industry, and to become that well-known person. That doesn't mean that she's posting on LinkedIn every day. In fact, she probably only posts there I don't know, once a week, maybe once every few weeks. She maybe sends a newsletter to stay top of mind with her ideal clients once a month. She speaks maybe 4 or 5, 6 times a year, but it's from that deep domain expertise that she's able to create and that specialization. She works in a very, if I told you what it was, you may even be able to figure out who she is. So I'm not going to tell you what she does, but she's very specific in what she does. And as a result, clients come to her. That's a rainmaker. You can be a rainmaker too. You might say, well, I don't have that kind of specialization and I do something more broad or I'm more of a generalist. You know what? You can keep arguing for that, or you can go figure out what you want to be known for in a very specific, specialized way and set yourself up to be a rainmaker. That doesn't mean that you have to turn away other types of work. But what it does mean is that you've built a skill set that says, you know what, I can choose a niche and I can figure out how to create a reputation around that niche and relationships around that niche and results and outcomes around that niche and become a rainmaker. And if in 5 years I want to do it again in a different specialization, I can do that because it's a skill. That's the thought process, not arguing for all the reasons you want to be a generalist. Okay, giving you a lecture today. Finally, let's talk about Sarah. Sarah created a rainmaker scenario for herself because she focused on a very, again, another example of like Rachel, she didn't have sales experience, but she became a rainmaker because she was willing to go all in on a very specific industry and to become a student of that industry and constantly be talking with people and going to events. In Rachel's case, she did it a lot more through speaking. In Sarah's case, she did it a lot more through industry events and associations, becoming that go-to person for her local area, for the association that she's in, being that driver to help ideal clients to see what is possible for them and their organizations. And she did this all through building up her reputation in those associations as one of the industry experts, as a go-to person in the industry. And I want to say to you, this isn't about Sarah specifically, but in general, it might be that Sarah's not the expert in the like the foremost, most expertly person who knows everything about the industry. She might not be that person. I don't know. I'm using her as an example here. I don't know if she is or she isn't. That's not a thing, right? There's no one, again, anointing someone to say, this is the person in the industry who knows the most. It's about how willing are you to build reputation? How willing are you to be curious and make strong recommendations? How willing are you to talk to ideal clients and advise them? How willing are you? And in Sarah's example, she's very willing to do that because she's found that niche and she's built that reputation and those relationships over time through several associations that are specific to the niche that she's in. So that gives you another example of how you can become a rainmaker. So as we wrap up today's episode, I want to remind you to go register for the workshop, How to Always Have Your Next Consulting Client Lined Up Without the Constant Pressure. Part of it is about this rainmaking, right? You can go to icworkshop.info, the 2 letters IC for independent consultant, workshop.info, and to go put today's episode into action. I want to encourage you to answer this question. What would change if you became the rainmaker in your consulting business? The next question, how likely do you think it is that you can become the rainmaker for your consulting business? On a scale of 1 to 10. Why is it that number? What would make it a 10? What would make it inevitable that you decided and believe it's just a natural way of operating that you're the rainmaker? Rainmaking is not a personality trait. It is a business owner capability, and you can build it. I'll remind you one last time to register for that live training and I'll help show you how to always have your next consulting client lined up without that constant pressure as a rainmaker. All right, my friend, thanks for tuning in, and I will see you again next week. Take care. Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melisaliberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.